I was born in a stable, doesn't mean I'm a bloody horse.
How are you doing? I'm Doug Devaney and this is Plaisteach. For the last 9 years, I have been Santa. And not just any Santa. Oh yes. Over the course of the last 9 years, I have been the man in red at Selfridges, in Hamleys, on top of the O2, outside the London Palladium, inside footballers' houses. I have even been name-checked by Basil Brush. Oh yes. It is, my friends, the best job in the world. In fact, I love it so much that I actually once was the man in red on Christmas Day itself, giving out presents at the hotel of a well-known World of Adventures, which of course shall go nameless. So I turn up on the day itself, at the appointed hour, with the man in red in a trundle case, the costume, the boots, the beard, the false belly. And I am met at the door by this skinny little lad who has obviously drawn the short straw and had to work on Christmas Day, and also has the unenviable job of showing me to what we laughingly call my dressing room. Now, as we head on down the corridor, he leans in towards me and he says, "By the way, Santa, just so you know, we've got a traveller family in." And his wide eyes and bright smile seem to suggest a kind of understanding between us. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? It's a hotel. We're all travellers. So anyway, for the next 2 hours, I am being the man in red, going ho, 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 and handing out the presents to all the kids and telling them that it's just a little something extra. And that's when I spot them. The traveller family. The kids first. It's 2 boys and a girl. Now, the lads have got hair the colour of freshly washed carrots. Each follicle has been scraped over to straightness. The hair has been parted with a knife. The daughter is a freckle-faced princess. The mother is made up immaculately, and I do mean immaculate. She's wearing a dress that sparkles as though she's a Quality Street rapper. The dad, well, the dad is stood at the bar, quietly waiting his turn, as he has been for quite some time. But he's from Kilkenny, not Clare, not like the old man. So anyway, I've already done 2 hours of handing out gifts. I've got an hour left to go. I've got no more gifts to give. He stood waiting at the bar. We get talking. And finally, he turns to me and says, "So, where you from?" And I look down at the boots, the costume, at the false belly, and I say, "Well, Lapland, of course." He goes, "Right, of course." And he turns back to the bar to make sure of his place in a queue of 1. But that's not the point, because there is a point. And the point is this, that he and I have asked each other the eternal Irish question. The question that is on the lips of everyone from that small, small island, and on the lips of their sons and daughters too. Where are you from?
Yes, my mother was from a small town called, a small village, very small village called Currans, very near Farranfore Airport in County Kerry. And my father was from the Midlands. He was from Tarlington in County Offaly.
Well, my parents had come from Tralee.
My grandfather was originally from Connemara.
My mother's from Clala, County Mayo, near
Right.
Ballinaw.
Banbridge in County Down.
My dad was born and raised in Galway.
I actually commissioned a genealogist from Dublin to look into the Irish heritage side. Fascinating, because there wasn't much records, except my great aunt Kate had written a letter to my cousin setting out quite a bit of family history, and the genealogist said that that was absolutely fantastic. Those were the if you like, the clues that he needed to explore much more deeply into our Irish heritage, and he was able to go back to the 1840s.
My mum's family are from Mayo and Leitrim and Wicklow.
He's also from the north. Well, I was born in Belfast, raised in Kilkenny.
Grandmother's from County Carlow, so she's from just outside Carlow Town.
My dad's from the city of Waterford.
Kiloglan, County Kerry, on the west coast of Ireland, which is noted for its annual Puck Fair, the first weekend of August. is feasted and hampered, and they have the gypsies come in from all the west of Ireland, and there's a horse fair, and lots of singing and dancing. The pubs don't shut for 3 days.
My family are from Dublin originally, moved over in different waves between, so I think my granddad first moved over in the 50s and then went home, met my granny. My mum then came about and then they moved back over, moved to Slough in the late 70s to become a nurse, and there I came about.
Ennis, County Clare. Oh, actually, a village just outside called Quin or Tulla. It actually doesn't matter, but geography was never a Devaney strong suit. However, if you're asking for road directions, well, sit back. Now then, Devaney or Devaney, or sometimes both. My dad used to, if he was talking directly to you, he'd call himself Michael Devaney, but if he was on the phone, it was Mike Devaney. Now, a little history lesson. The name Devaney or Devaney stems from either O'Dovana or O'Devany, and we, it seems, are descended from chieftains who were themselves named after a fortress in County Armagh, or we're descended from a bishop who was beheaded in County Down and is now most of the way towards becoming a saint. When I say it's a history lesson, it's actually more of a an exercise in guesswork. But one thing is certain, and that is that the Devaney family has its very own coat of arms. Oh yes, most impressive. Not bad for a family that could barely afford a coat, if my uncles are to be believed. Now, don't be too impressed by this. It's a bit of an industry. You can get pretty much one of these for every Irish surname that there is. They will make them into coasters or placemats, or you can have them framed up on your wall to hang there, or in fact they can be printed onto cups or indeed onto t-shirts. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that there's a particular symbol in the middle of the shield there. Yes, it's only the bloody right hand of Ulster, isn't it? Thrown out by the Brits, so we were, whether from County Armagh or from County Down, forced to roam the west of Ireland in order to find a village or town that we could call home. Curse you, England. Well, we seem to have at least buried the hatchet. Obviously, my dad married a girl from Reading. But there you have it, the Devaney family history illustrated. Sort of. Kind of. Not at all. Because the Devaney family story is a typical story of Ireland of its time. It's a large family working the land. Names passed down through generations. So Michael Devaney is the son of Michael Devaney, and I'm Douglas Michael Devaney. It's not an exact tradition, but then, like I say, my mum's from Reading, and she has a brother called Michael, so anyhow. Michael Devaney Sr., my grandfather, died when Michael Devaney Jr., my father, was relatively young. So Michael Jr. becomes Michael Sr. at the age of 15 and becomes the man of the house, the head of the household, the main breadwinner. And he turns his hand to pretty much everything, poaching, joining the Irish army, then being kicked out because he was too young. And finally, he gets a job at the age of 17 working at Shannon Airport. Now, it's not a bad job, as long as you can stand the sound of American tourists coming on in and declaring themselves to be home at last, and I am aware of that irony. And also, the pay is pretty much as good as you can get in England, but it is a precarious existence, because Michael has only got the job because of getting the nod from the friend of a family. Now, all he has to do is fall out with that friend of the family, and it's back to poaching, and there's 10 other mouths to feed. Now remember, it's 1960. Here's a 17-year-old Irish lad with a love of Elvis and a tongue that takes few prisoners. He's going to fall out with that friend of the family sooner rather than later. And so, Devaney or Devaney, descended from chieftains or from a martyr, from Quin or from Tulla, in order to keep his family secure, Michael has one of two options: west or east, because staying in Ireland isn't an option.
My mother came over first. She came over in 1942 to train to be a nurse. But you think afterwards, you kind of accept what your parents did. But she came to at wartime, the country at peace, to a wartime country. I mean, in the centre of London, and she, you know, she was bombed out of hospitals and things, and you know, and why she did that was because she decided she was a farmer's daughter, and she was working away in the farm, and she wanted more, and she wanted more opportunity than that. And she had an uncle who was a doctor in London. She wrote to him for advice. And at that time in Ireland, you had to pay for your training to be a nurse. And he said he would be very happy to pay for her to be a nurse in Ireland. But if she wanted to come to London, then he would find a hospital and he'd help her in every way he could and see her as often as he could. And she decided to come to London because she was scared that she wouldn't succeed in the training, and she didn't want to be beholden to him. She didn't want him to pay out money.
But I never felt that I came to England. I rather stayed in England rather than returning to Ireland.
My mother came here because her sister came to Leeds, and her husband were doing building, but my mother went into engineering and tailoring. So that you know, it wasn't just the aspect of the building that came over for it. Was just, and I said to her before she died, I said to her, what brought you to Leeds? And she just went, well, family brought me to Leeds.
So my grandfather was from Banbridge in County Down.
I was talking to a friend about that recently. He's also from the north, and we were saying, did the Troubles have that effect of not allowing us to believe in a future?
I asked him why he came across, and he told me very bluntly that the Protestants cut a hole in my prick.
I always felt like an outsider in my home, and in some ways in the town and the culture. So I thought the way to be an insider was to get away from there.
I didn't ask him any more about that.
And she went, I could get a job in the morning, a job in the afternoon if I didn't like the job in the morning.
He came after the war, but it was still being in the 1940s. And he came, like a lot of Irishmen, to the building sites to rebuild Britain.
Yes, like most Irish people, they heard a fight was going on in England, so they joined before the war. You know,
he was in England, clearing up bomb sites. He told me.
I have no idea why my mother came over here. Her father, which I didn't find this out until I was in my late 30s when we were at a baptism or something. He said, "You see that woman over there? That's your granddad's other daughter." And they'd never been mentioned before. So I think that something had happened, that he had left the home, which, you know, in Ireland in those days, 1936 or whatever, was quite a thing to do, and gone off with another woman. And my mother came over here where there were aunts and people there. Various uncles had moved to England to get jobs.
My grandmother waved 6 off, and my uncle told me there was a small hill in front of the farm where they lived when they were growing up in a little hamlet called Emmerclye, near Milltown in Galway.
But the story behind my father is that he had a younger brother who went to Christian Brothers School, and he heard that one of the Christian Brothers was behaving rather badly, as Christian Brothers tended to do sometimes. And he went up to the school and laid this man out. Bang! Just hit him. And that meant he and all his brothers had to leave the village, or leave Tralee.
Like many other Irish people, they moved to improve their circumstances. And I think people don't recognise how tough it was in Ireland in the 50s and 60s, and why these people felt, you know. In a way, there's a lot of bitterness, I think, that they had to leave Ireland. A lot of them didn't choose to. And it's not like today, you can't just jump on a plane and fly back in an hour. In a lot of cases, it was quite pretty permanent.
They'd walk to the train station, and when they're on the train, she'd be stood on the little hill in front with the tea towel waving goodbye.
Wherever you go, you always end up with the family. Always the family. Now, this is the Devaney clan gathered in Manchester sometime about 1979 to 1980, thereabouts. So over on the far right there, you've got Jim Hanna, who's my grandmother's second husband. Then there's my Auntie Maureen. There's Chrissy there with her arms around my younger brother, Stevie D. Hello there, Stevie. And then there's little Bernie just down there, and then right next to them, above them rather, there's my grandmother, Phyllis. Dad used to call her Big Bridge. And then just peeking at the back there, there's Jojo, and on the far left, looking rather uncomfortable, there's my Aunt Teresa. I'm not entirely sure who the guy in the beard is, nor a couple of the others, probably cousins, and I'll probably be told another time. But they're lurking there at the back, you can probably see with his head bobbing up. There is yours truly, Douglas Michael Devaney, first of the Plaisteachs. There's no Michael, there's no Eamon, there's no Martin, there's no brother Brendan, there's no Kevin. You'd like Kevin, everybody liked Kevin. But you get the picture. This is a big Irish family in Manchester, except for Stevie D and me, because Michael Devaney didn't cross the Irish Sea to settle in the northwest of England. Instead, he settled in the southeast. More specifically, he settled in a little town by the name of Maidenhead. Now, you cannot get a more English town than Maidenhead, or to give it its proper name, the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. Situated on the Thames, 40 miles west of London, Maidenhead is the home to Swan Upping, Wind in the Willows, and a small constellation of light entertainment stars, or it was in the 70s. The other thing that Maidenhead was home to in the 1970s was factories. Now, Black & Decker was the big employer as far as my family was concerned. We all got a job there, myself included. There were lots of positions at lots of different levels, and if you wanted to rise through the ranks at B&D, Dick & Dockers, well, you could. And Michael Devaney wanted to rise through the ranks. Over the course of a few short years, he ended up moving up from forklifts and lorries through to supervising over goods inwards and distribution. Basically, he went from t-shirt to overall to suit. There is a story, and I'm not sure that I should tell it, but since it's just us. It's the mid-1970s, and a go slow by lorry drivers means that the drill parts that have been flown on in are still stuck at London Heathrow Airport. Now, obviously, the management of Black & Deckers need those drill parts in order for the factories to carry on manufacturing. And so they've got one of two options. Either they can wait for the industrial action to finish, or they can try and find another supplier. So they go for option number 3, bribe the drivers. Now, this does cost money, but just not so much. So, guess who turns up at London Heathrow Airport at the dead of night in the mid-1970s with a wad of cash in order to bribe a bunch of lorry lads so that they could fill up the pallets and get those tool parts on their way? None other than Michael Devaney, young Irishman on the rise. Now, you have to remember that this is the mid-1970s, and an Irish accent is pretty much the punchline to a joke, or a catchphrase for a comedian. It's Frank Carson's The Way I Tell 'Em, or Jimmy Cricket's Come Here. It's the age of Bernard Manning and the Wheel Tappers and Shunters Social Club. It's the age of two paddies walk into a bar. It's also the age of the IRA bombing campaign on the mainland in Birmingham, Manchester and London. And so here's a young Irish bloke with a rather distinctive accent, unless you catch him on the phone, wandering around an airport with a wad full of cash and making himself known where the lorries and the warehouses are. I'm not entirely sure at what point my dad realised that maybe his accent wasn't quite so funny at this moment. Well, you don't, do you? It's your own voice. However, there he was, once again stuck with just a couple of options. And just heading back home wasn't one of them. Now, I'm not saying that any lorry drivers were bribed that night. I'm not saying that anything illegal or untoward took place at London Heathrow Airport that evening in the mid-70s. What I will say is that throughout that decade, nobody ever once complained that they couldn't find a Black & Decker drill. Impressive.
My grandmother first came over at the start of the Second World War and worked in the kitchens at Harrow when she was 14. It was one of those that the family didn't have money, so they sent the granddaughter, did the opposite of the evacuations, that they sent my grandmother into London during the Blitz to work at the kitchens at Harrow boarding school. And then she moved up from there, moved to Stoke. She was a cook, so she worked in the canteens in the potteries around there for a bit. So she's a lifelong Port Vale fan for reasons that we didn't really understand until she told us about it. She then moved back and met my grandfather. He moved over with the view of bringing Granny over. First went to Coventry because he wanted to work in the car industry, and was met with the hostility that came with a lot of Irish men moving to this country in the 1950s. So he said, "Sorry, I'm not doing this, I'm going home." Moved back, and then my granny's sister and her husband were going to move over to Forest Hill in South London. And Grandad and Granny were like, "Look, we've got a young daughter, we'll come over and try it and see how it goes." And they didn't look back. We're very lucky with where they ended up. Then my mum, throughout the 70s, initially wanted to be a nun because she saw Song of Bernadette and thought, that's the life for me. Then decided against that, thankfully, and became a nurse. So
I had two aunts who were missionaries in Nigeria, one in Ibadan and one near Lagos, I think, and another who was a missionary in Kenya, and then one who was in Blackburn in Lancashire.
I remember arriving at Heathrow Airport because not for me, the boat, yours truly, ever the snob, was going to go on a plane. It was my first airplane flight. I know, Doug, I know, I'm such a snob. And it took me 2 hours to find my way out of Heathrow. I'd never traveled outside Ireland. And I remembered having a fistful of twopenny pieces because they were in circulation, getting to a phone box and phoning Catholic hostels. And there were a lot of Catholic hostels which took in the immigrant Irish. And I found one in Victoria, and I took myself and what would be considered an overnight travel bag, which contained my entire worldly possessions, to the hostel. And that's how I started.
So when we moved from Ireland to England, that's probably the first time that you have that feeling of being different or an outsider or somebody, you know, from another place.
He didn't speak any English when he arrived, coming from the Gaeltacht in Connemara, so he had to learn as he went. He used to, obviously, he was quite a devout Catholic as well, so he used to go to Mass, but he would end up going to Polish Mass instead because he said he could pick up a couple more words there than he could from the English alternative, which I always found quite funny. He used to go to confession then once a week with the Polish priest, but neither of them had a clue what the other were saying to each other, so they went through the motions. He said it was fantastic. It was like you could say whatever you want and you still got absolved. It didn't matter.
So I went from a Catholic primary school where we knew everyone. Everyone was kind of related in either whether it was like my mum's friend Jacinta, who was an auntie, because we'd known her since she'd known me since before I was born, so to speak. Or it was, you know, brothers and sisters that had moved over to Slough because their family were over. But everyone was related and everyone knew each other, so we all sort of hung around and played football and all that sort of stuff. When I went to secondary school, I didn't go to St Bernard's, the convent in Slough. I went to Langley up the road, and there was a disconnect of like, oh, so none of your families know each other. And it took me ages to get used to the fact that no one in my secondary school's parents knew who each other were, and that they wouldn't meet outside of the school drop off and pick up. And it kind of felt really sorry for a lot of people that you don't really have that level of community that we had. And I don't know whether it's because there's I wouldn't say ghettoization, but that we were kind of all forced together through church and social events and stuff like that made us sort of feel safe and made us feel like we knew everyone. So we were a bit bolder than we needed to. Bold, but then knowing that you couldn't be too bold, because if you did something wrong, your mum would find out. That someone's mum would be doing the rounds. And it happened a number of times that there was that unofficial police force of mums looking out the curtains. And if you were doing something you shouldn't be doing and you knew you shouldn't be doing it, your mum would know before you got home.
You know, people dispute the term no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, you know, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Personally, I fulfilled two of the criteria.
He was digging a trench, I think, as part of roadworks outside Nottingham at one point, and another workman stepped on his boot and he started giving out to him, and the two of them started kind of squaring up to each other. They started fighting, tearing lumps out of each other in this trench, until they realised, like a few minutes in, that they were both shouting at each other in Irish. They were both from Connemara, and it turned out it was actually his cousin that he hadn't seen in 20 years. So they ended up going home. He brought him home for dinner. He stayed for 2 nights.
When I came to London, I was definitely Irish. I was stopped by the police and asked if I'd been drinking. I was asked if I was a terrorist.
My mother said, I don't think felt safe. And she would certainly tell me off about the way I did things. Like I would have a couple of Irish poet or an Irish paper, and I wouldn't have it hidden in my handbag.
We used to have big do's on Boxing Day when all the Irish diaspora from Kilburn would come up with their bottles and things and sing Irish rebel songs and dance. And Auntie Catherine, very frail lady, used to read the teacups, would recite a poem, and everybody would be quiet while she recited the poem. And then murder and mayhem would break out again. Us kids used to hide under the table and just see these feet stomping past us and everything getting more and more chaotic. It's wonderful.
But it was a very, very scary time to be Irish in the United Kingdom. And I know many an Irish lady who took elocution lessons to try and rid herself of an Irish brogue. And it was necessary because you wouldn't get a job if you had an Irish accent.
Always have the right change for the bus, so they don't hear your Irish accent.
The Irish today don't have the same level of racism. In fact, they don't have any that entirely integrated as they've done in every society across the world, especially America. But back in the day, to be Irish in Britain was top shit. And you could only survive if you moved into a heavily dominated Irish community like Kilburn, which is where I went, by the way. Nobody believed I was Irish, but hey ho.
Once upon a time lived a gentle pious man by the name of St. Brendan, and he did dwell in Clonfert with his brothers the monks. One day Brendan heard that God's paradise was to be found in the wide, wide sea, and so he and the brothers set forth to find a new holy home. They had not sailed far when they came upon a place which, though barren, moved like a wave upon the ocean. For this was no island. This was in fact a giant fish, who was forever trying to bring his tail to meet his head. "St. Brendan," said the fish, whose name was Jasconius, "do not try to help. This task is for me and for me alone. It is not for you. Travel onward, St. Brendan, travel onward." And so St. Brendan and his brothers travelled onwards, through the coagulated sea, past the island of sheep, under the crystal pillar, till they came upon a most unhappy man upon a rock, beaten by wind, racked by waves, tormented by demons. For this was Judas, the most evil trader ever. Despite Judas's treachery, St. Brendan felt moved to try to lift his curse, but Judas refused. "No, St. Brendan," he said, "this torment is mine and mine alone. It is not for you to relieve. Travel onward, St. Brendan, travel onward." And so St. Brendan and his brothers travelled onward and onward. One day they came upon the island of St. Paul the hermit, who had none for company save an otter, who provided him with food. St. Brendan sought to bring an end to this solitude. "No man is an island," he did proclaim. But St. Paul the hermit did refuse. "This island belongs to this man and no other," he declared. "Travel onward, St. Brendan, travel onward." So St. Brendan did travel onward, and onward, and onward, till finally he and his brothers came upon the promised land of the saints, with endless fruit in its trees, priceless jewels amongst its rocks, and the freshest water in its rivers. At last, proclaimed the brothers, we have arrived. But now it was St. Brendan who was not happy. This is not the land for me, he announced. Perhaps there is no land. Perhaps I shall always be St. Brendan the traveller, travelling onward, ever onward, to other lands.
You came over from Ireland in
1966, June 66.
And did you come straight to Slough? Or?
No, I didn't. No, I came to a friend of my father's that was a greyhound trainer in Walton Abbey in Essex.
When
I was 16 years and 4 months. It's in the last 20 years that has changed. It's changed everything. Last 20, when I came here at first, this was a pub, labour exchange, you find rooms. When you come in here, you found a job, you got a room from somebody that knew somebody, you got a job from somebody that knew somebody, and it was camaraderie. And it wasn't just for the Irish to the Irish. And it's all changed now. All changed. You trusted everybody then. And you'd get a tap on the shoulder and say, watch it, you know. There's no such thing as people that help you to find a job. Very few will help you find a job. And rooms. So you're on your own, really. Sing along on a Thursday night, one Thursday night, the next Thursday night is trad. We also do poetry nights, we do readings. It's something you won't see in any pub. You won't see photographs or order services up in a corner behind the bar of people that have gone to play music and talk beyond the stars. You won't find that.
Well, I was born near London a good few years ago, and though I speak like Essex Main, I'll have you all to know that right out from the very start, there never was a doubt that I was Irish through and through. Here's how that comes about. Me father came from Ireland, me mother did as well. So if you say I'm English, you can bugger off to hell. Here's the simple reason, you'll all agree, of course. Just because I was born in a stable doesn't mean I'm a bloody horse. Me mum, she came from Sligo, my old dad from Inchico. And though I might not sound it, mate, I'm Irish to the core. When summer comes around each year, I can't wait to go back, 'cause I love the songs and music, the stories and the crack. And I wear me shamrock proudly for all me mates to see. Me auntie sends it every year across the Irish Sea. There's not a prouder Irishman on this planet to be found than myself and the sons on a Paddy's night when the shamrock's getting dragged. Me father came from Ireland, me mother did as well. So if you say I'm English, you can bugger off to hell. Here's the simple reason, you'll all agree, of course. Just because I was born in a stable doesn't mean I'm a bloody horse. Being Irish isn't just about the place where you were born. It's in your blood, it's in your soul, evening, night and morn. That drop of inbred decency that never could be taught. The unique and ancient culture for which our fathers fought. And I was there in Stuttgart on that famous day, when the boys in green stuffed England and sent them on their way. Well, I thought I'd gone to heaven, sure I never will forget the magic when Ray Houghton put the ball in Shilton's net. Me father came from Ireland, me mother did as well. So if you say I'm English, you can bugger off to hell. Here's the simple reason, you'll all agree, of course. Just because I was born in a stable doesn't mean I'm a bloody horse. I'm every bit as Irish as those wasters in the Dáil, those smug and cosy Tories in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. If they'd get their act together, no kids would need to roam. And instead of building half the world, they could build our world at home. So call me Plastic Paddy if you feel you must. But if I think you mean it now, you'll eat some English dust. 'Cause I can take a slaggin', laugh at an Irish yarn, but certain things are sacred, as you're about to learn. Me father came from Ireland, me mother did as well. So if you say I'm English, you can bugger off to hell. Here's the simple reason, you'll all agree, of course. Just because I was born in a stable doesn't mean I'm a bloody horse. Sinead.
Can't remember when we had a huge bomb in the town I went to school in. And if it had been 15 minutes later, there would have been a lot of school children killed or injured. It was just before we got out of school in the main street there.
I came down once, I'd been in Manchester, and I was going to be met by my friend Sean Barrett. And I couldn't see him anywhere, and I was phoning him. We didn't have mobile phones. And I saw all these people rushing past, and two of them were nuns. And somebody said, "Get out of the station." And I suddenly realized this was serious. I got out through the front door. I saw Sean. So I said, "Sean," which was not the wisest thing to shout out. And the army people were there, and suddenly this crump went off. It wasn't like bang, it was crump, like an implosion. And the only injury was a Chinese man who'd been in the takeaway opposite where the phone booth was, actually. And the bomb had gone off near there, and the glass had shattered, and he was killed because he didn't know what was going on.
I remember hearing someone saying, laughing, joking, it's a joke thing. But I mean, talk about me and some other guy that I was friendly with who was from Roscommon. Oh, it's funny that those two Irish people got together, isn't it? They could be, they could be an IRA cell. They've deliberately come here to, it's funny how they've got to know each other.
I went to a play, I remember, at the Riverside Theatre. I can't remember, it was an Irish woman writer, and there was a bomb blast in the middle or near the end of the play, and I just burst into tears. I was so physically shocked, and I couldn't stop crying. And of course it wasn't the play, it was just the cumulative effect. And I thought, why didn't she warn us? But she didn't warn us because that would have ruined the dramatic moment.
Again, we was a suspect community, and you don't put your chin out too much. You don't put your head above the water. You just keep quiet.
So I got told when I was 5 to go back where I came from. I remember it vividly, going home and asking my mum what that meant. And she was like, "Well, you're from Slough. I don't know what they're saying." And it was this, my mum was a big one of, we didn't celebrate St. Patrick's Day because she said that if you were outwardly exposing yourself as being a very proud Irish person, that it was very difficult to unlock that from what was on the news every day, with the work the IRA were doing, which is it complicated things slightly because my granddad's father fought in the Easter Rising, so there were big, and then he fought on the losing side in the Civil War because they were anti-partition. So there's a big feeling in a lot of in a lot. Well, my grandfather specifically was very pro-unity, anti-violence, but big on pro-unity. So that used to lead some. Growing up, I remember some really interesting conversations between my mum and my granddad. Of my mum saying, well, she understands why people feel the way they do about Irish people when I was growing up. My grandfather saying, but you know, the Brits.
Even when I came to England and I'd be walking somewhere, and if I saw a man on the horizon or two men, I immediately thought, what are they doing? Or what are they digging up? What are they burying? There was a sense of menace, of, yeah, this kind of fear, this mysterious and menacing fear.
My grandfather was laid in state in Quecks Road with the tricolour, with the Irish flag on his coffin, because he'd been part of the Republican Army, and he was taken in the hearse through Kilburn High Road, and hardly anybody took any notice, because the IRA had paraded through Kilburn High Road and used to collect money down there with the berets and the black glasses and what have you. But as we turned a corner to go up to Kensal Rise Crematory, there were two black guys on the corner, and they both stopped and gave the fist as we went past. And I suddenly realised, yeah, this funny old man was actually a freedom fighter at one time. But when we got to the grave, there was a young priest there, and he refused to bury him with the flag on the coffin. And there were these guys who actually were in trench coats and trilby hats loomed out of the mist, and struggled with the priest with his flag, and in the end gave up and said, you know, Michael Hurley had risked his life so that Ireland may be free and we can hang our heads up high. And my mum and dad, of course, were looking at the ground in great embarrassment. And these guys came back to the house and sat separately in the kitchen drinking their Jameson, while the rest of the mourners went into the living room. And they just sat there and talked about the old time. And I regret there's huge swathes of history that, whether consciously or not, they didn't talk about. They didn't really, they sang the songs and what have you, and talked about the filth of the black and tans, and De Valera and Collins. They weren't real uncles, but Uncle Paddy and my grandfather didn't speak because they were on opposite sides of the Civil War. My grandfather was De Valera and the other man was Collins, and they both lived in Kilburn. They both attended weddings and funerals and baptisms, and they never spoke to each other for the whole of their lives.
If it had happened 15 minutes later, it would have killed many of us, I think. So it just happened before school got out. It was funny because there was a mixture of life as normal, let's not talk about it, and then there would be these bomb scares during double maths. So girls got their boyfriends to ring up, say there's a bomb, and then we'd all be disrupted. And, you know, I remember the headmistress saying something, if there's another bomb scare, it'll be double maths on a Friday afternoon for everyone. And the bomb scare stopped for a while.
Monday, June the 25th, 1990. And I arrive at Dublin Airport. And there is nary a bus nor a taxi to be had for at least an hour. Why? Because Ireland are in the knockout stages of the World Cup. This was Italia 90. And Jack Charlton and his men were making a fine green fist of it. In the 3 matches that they played so far, they hadn't won one. Draw specialists. And tonight, in the knockout stages, playing against Romania, they were maintaining their consistency. After 90 minutes, it was still 0-0. A further 30 minutes of extra time didn't trouble either side's net either. So it's not until the penalty shootout that the net really starts billowing. Goal, 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 4-4. Ireland are still drawing. And then up steps Timofte. Daniel Timofte, Romania's number 16. He places the ball on the penalty spot and takes a couple of steps back. Dressed in yellow and blue, with his shorts halfway up his crack, he takes a small run up, sweeps his leg out in order to strike to his left. The Irish keeper, Paddy Packy Bonner, dives down to his right and parries the shot with both hands. It's a blaze of motion even in action replay. Not the save, but Bonner's getting back up, running back towards his teammates, and the little jump he makes halfway along. Because he knows that O'Leary's penalty is a formality. And it is. 5-4, Ireland win. Dublin is electric. Every street is full. By the time I get there, every pub is packed. And Packy Bonner's save is on constant rotation on every TV, in every corner of every bar that you hit. The celebrations go on for the next 5 days. Each and every day, there's a freshly printed T-shirt or tea towel or poster celebrating Jack Charlton and his boys. Olé, olé, olé is being sung at various random intervals. There is an Italian sun shining down on Dublin, and its people bask in it rather than burn. Now, the following day, of course, there's another football match to be played. And so I'm watching it in yet another bar in Dublin. And this time it's England playing against plucky little Belgium. Once again, it's a 0-0 goal fest. And once again, it goes to extra time, although not to penalties, because David Platt scores the winner in the 120th minute. David Platt. You remember him? No, me neither. But Packy Bonner and his save. For the next 5 days in Dublin, it's Packy Bonner, Packy Bonner, Packy Bonner, Packy Bonner, olé, 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 Packy Bonner T-shirt, all the way through to Saturday, June the 30th. And Ireland play Italy, the host nation, and lose 1-0. But that's okay. It's the quarterfinals of the World Cup they got through to, the last 8. They've lost against the hosts. And how many times have the hosts won the World Cup? There's a massive amount of partying all through the night. June comes to an end with a great crack. Sunday, July the 1st. And things have changed slightly. Now, Jack Charlton and his men returned to Dublin to a hero's welcome. A bigger crowd than greeted the Pope, so they like to tell us. And some things do remain the same. After all, there's still a vast number of T-shirts and tea towels to be sold. A defiant olé, olé, olé gets sung at just as many random intervals. And there's still football to be played. There's another quarter-final taking place that night. But this time, once again, it's England against Cameroon. And I just know that I won't be watching this one in a bar surrounded by cheering, jeering lads in green. Instead, I watched the match in the lobby of the hostel, alongside all the other English tourists. And when England finally do win after extra time, I know that there won't be any dancing in the streets. And I know that we won't be raising a glass to the lads outside. Instead, it's a bottle of overpriced beer from the hostel fridge and an early night. And there's no need to book a cab to take me to the airport the following morning either. There's going to be plenty of those. Just waiting. Waiting to take me back. Back where I belong.
I think if you're looking at points of change, real fundamental change about the way the Irish were regarded in this country, you can pinpoint it almost exactly to one particular day, and you can look it up and see when it is, because I wouldn't remember, but it's day 1990 when the Irish team played in Rome. And for me, it was when the Italians won the winning goal of that match, and the Irish fans sang "Viva la Roma." But for someone else I know, because I was arguing me, he said no, it was when Italy had a strict ban, no alcohol before any match, but they lifted it for that match. They said we can trust the Irish. And it was suddenly that people saw them as performing on a world stage, but it wasn't the team. It was the fans, it was the supporters, that this is how you behave. You support your team, don't diss anyone else. You're not rubbish. You can get drunk if you like, but you don't smash up the bar.
Mm.
You buy the man behind the bar a drink if you're going to have one. And it was absolutely, I remember being there at the time, and it was people, there was another kind of cliched view of what it meant to be Irish. And it had nothing to do with bombs. It had nothing to do with politics. It was seen to be a way of doing things, which was, and everyone could recognize was an okay way of doing something, of actually being able to take the best out of that moment, but not steal it from someone else. Yeah, you're a better team than us. We're just grand. It's just been great being able to play with you.
The reason I fell in love with football was watching Paul McGrath, one of the greatest footballers that ever walked the face of the planet, and he deserves to be spoken of in with the echelons of Cruyff's and like today Messi and Ronaldo and stuff. He was magnificent, like composed, athletic, powerful, like everything that's to love about football wrapped up in one man. And it was the reason that like I said, I fell in love with the sport, was watching him, and then I built support around him, that one man. And yeah, great man. My granny's got a picture of him in her living room.
I'm now older than my mother was when she returned to Ireland after a lifetime working over here. I think it's a difficult word for an immigrant. Taking her again, she wanted to go home, but of course there was no home for her to go back to after 40 years because the country has changed, even though she was a regular visitor. And the country had changed from the one that she left.
It's a hyphenated identity in some senses. People are like, we're a much more diverse and multicultural society than we were even 30 years ago. And it's time that kind of that notion of what it means to be Irish evolved.
I must have been commuting in London, and very near, in Tottenham Court Road, I saw that a new sandwich bar had opened up. And this would have been 1991, 92, and they called themselves an Irish sandwich bar. And you think, my God, it was only 10 years ago, you wouldn't put your name in front of a bar if it was Irish sounding, because you'd be afraid of a brick through the window.
For a long time, Ireland didn't acknowledge its diaspora, even though they did so much for us. You know, the remittances alone that were sent back for Irish immigrants all over the world kept the economy afloat for decades, just from an economic perspective.
Great Aunt Lil and Great Aunt Kate, they were the sisters of my grandfather. And I was very close to them. But I do remember once, and they were very devout Catholics, the pair of them. Oh, incredibly devout. Walking in the neighbourhood of Liverpool where they lived, and they were greeted by some neighbours in the street. And my great Aunt Kate introduced me to them as their adopted niece, that I was adopted. And I thought, hello. Didn't say anything. They never said anything to me. We never discussed it. And I thought, these are strict Catholics who are lying about my origins. And that made me realise there was stigma about my colour. Although they were very kind to me, this brown skin colour was a step too far for them to say that, oh, well, actually, you know, isn't that, I always remember that.
And of course, there were lots of anti-IRA sentiment around at the time, lots of IRA activity, and so it was hard to be part of the Irish community.
I was never brought up in Ireland. I didn't grow up. I mean, I had aspects of Irish cultural heritage from the diaspora, but I wasn't born and brought up in Ireland. I can't speak Gaelic, you know what I mean? And the same for Nigeria. I wasn't born and brought up in Nigeria. I don't speak Igbo.
I remember once going for an advert. There's a wonderful casting lady called Ros Hubbard, who is Irish herself. And as I was going in for this advert, she just went Irish like that. I thought, oh, okay. So I went in, did my Irish accent. It was for a margarine called Ballyclaw Light. And so I got the gig for Ballyclaw Light, and I went over to but I had no idea that I was supposed to keep up this fiction throughout. So I was in the hotel in Dublin with the producer, with a lovely guy called Paul Bradley, who is now a great friend. He's been a very great friend since that time. He's an actor, wonderful actor. And we were chatting away. And the producer said, "Oh, it's a funny thing. When you're in London, you all sounded very fucking Irish. And now you're in Dublin, you all sound very fucking English." So my advertisement for Ballyclorelight ended up being an English woman thinking it was marvellous on scones.
And as I said to you, I do take issue with the plastic bit. You know, because it implies to me, maybe I appear oversensitive about it, but I do think about these things, and you know, our experience is just as real as anybody else's. You know, you don't have plastic Pakistanis or plastic Afro-Caribbeans. Why plastic Irish?
Pretty early on, I knew I was different. There's something about a brown skin, and certainly, you know, where are you from? No, where are you really from?
No. Where are you really from? And this is a refrain that's still in currency in 21st century Ireland. Ask any non-white Irish immigrant, Irish person of colour in Ireland, and that's the one thing they'll always moan about, that they're speaking with a thick Dublin, Cork, Galway, loud accent, and they'll still get the, no, where are you really from? And then the person asking that question is positively offended when you refuse to give your life history, when you refuse.
I'm a black British woman of Irish Nigerian heritage. Thank you very much.
Another thing I remember I was working up in the Lyric in Belfast when was it in my would have been in my 20s, and I got an audition at the Abbey, and Tomás McConnell was the director at the Abbey at the time, and I did my audition piece, and he said, "What part of Ireland are you from?" And I said, I'm from London. And he said, "Oh, well, we would never employ you before one of our own people." I was too proud to say, "Look, hang on a minute. I'm Brendan Behan's niece," which probably would have helped. So I just slunk away.
You know, somebody said, do you get abroad much? And I said, I've lived all my life abroad.
It always comes back to the family. There they are again. See, there's Maureen and Chrissy and Big Bridge, and there's Teresa. You know, there's still the same people missing as well. There's no Michael, there's no Eamon, there's no Martin, there's no Kevin. You'd like Kevin. Always up for a laugh, Kevin. Everybody loved Kevin. My first journey to County Clare wasn't a sentimental one. We'd all come across in order to bury Kevin's ashes on the site of his grandfather's grave. And not his father's, but that's another story. So anyway, Michael Devaney Senior, my grandfather, was buried on the top of a hill that overlooked a local hurling field. As we busily trowelled the ashes into the soil, the priest looked about and said, "Well, at least you'll have a good view of the match." Now, it had started out as a lovely day. Cold, but very, very bright. But after the priest had given his blessing, crows started to descend on the nearby walls, and rain started to descend from a faraway sky. Kevin would have loved that. He laughed himself stupid, us travelling all this way just to get pissed on. He'd have done a little dance in the rain, if he wasn't already in powdered form. So anyway, after that, we all went across to Michael Senior's grave. I say grave, just where he was buried, because Michael Senior doesn't actually have a grave to call his own. Like I say, he is buried. It's not that kind of story. It's just that back in 1958, when he died, somebody managed to place him in the wrong hole in the graveyard. It was a small village. There weren't that many funerals, and after all, one hole in the ground tends to look like another. So they lowered the coffin in there, and nobody realised their mistake until after he was 6 foot under. Now, the family who actually had the reservation rights on the plot, well, they were kind of a little miffed about it and insisted that that body went in that hole. But nobody really wanted to disinter my grandfather. And so what they did was they simply laid this other fella and his coffin just down straight on top of my grandfather's coffin. So just 4 feet under. Despite coming in second, of course, it's the other fella who gets all the prizes. So it's him that gets the gravestone. It's him that gets the carving with the biblical quote. It's him that gets the memorial candle. And Michael Devaney Sr. Just gets one small metal cross at the foot of the plot. No name, no date. That's it. Now, the rest of the weekend is a fairly boozy one, especially where I'm concerned. We go around Tulla and Quin and Innis, where my dad recalls that you could shake a handsman across the road and not leave the pavement, where he once saw De Valera give a speech to the masses. We go to see the old house, Eiley Cotty, and we meet with the new people in there. They've been in there, what, 30 years? And of course we go back to the hotel and we drink and we dance and we laugh and we drink, and I get into an argument with the people behind the desk about losing my keys, and it's not my best moment. But it does give everybody something to talk about the following morning. And the next day I'm nursing a terrible hangover, and we're in another pub watching Man United on the telly, because wherever you go in the world you can always watch Man United on the telly. And I'm talking to some of the relatives, my dad's uncle for one thing, and he's one of those that didn't go away, one of those that stayed in Ireland. And he turns to me and he says, "So who are you?" And so I start to tell him that I'm Douglas Michael Devaney, the son of Michael Devaney, who is himself the son of the Michael Devaney that he knew, the one buried in the wrong hole. And I tell him about how Dad moved across from Clare to Maidenhead and married a girl from Reading. And I tell him how I went from Maidenhead to Liverpool to London to Brighton. When he stops me and he says, "Ah, so you're a plastic."
Not surprisingly hurt and a little hungover, I went to the bar and ordered a double. "Definitely a double?" asked the familiar man behind the bar. "St. Brendan," I said, "what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be travelling?" "This is an inn, my son," he replied. "We're all travellers here. But I can see from your drawing that you feel incomplete." "I don't feel genuine. I don't feel real," I told him. "I'm just plastic." "And what does that mean?" asked St. Brendan. "The names that people call themselves? Plastic or elastic or passport or boomerang? Does that make your family any less real? Does that make the name Devaney any less genuine?" "But my home," I started. "Home," he laughed. "I have travelled this world for centuries, and in my voyages I have found that home is wherever I am, and wherever I am is home. Find yourself, my son. Find yourself and you will find home. Find home in yourself." Now, are you paying for that double or not?
I remember when I was a student nurse, I would have been about 19 or so, and I was looking after this Irish lady. She was in bed, and she was a bit down, and she was saying how much she missed some aspect of our Irish family back home. And I told her I had an Irish heritage, and she looked at me. She said, "No, you don't." I said, "Yes, I do." Told her my surname. She said, "Okay. Were you adopted?" I said, "No." And I said, "I grew up in a convent run by Irish nuns, and I did Irish dancing." Never. So I stood there, I looked around, there was hardly anybody in the ward, and I did a little jig for her. To see that woman laughing with tears running down her face and the joy it brought her. And she said, "Well, I'll never make that mistake again, Elizabeth. I will never judge people on how they look." And I thought, wow, look at that. So it was a mixture of everything there. And for that lady to say that at the end was really lovely.
But I didn't know about that until we looked into my
She only
background.
realised this recently when I had the DNA done for Sharon
I
on
just thought
Ancestry.
we were all London-born, London. Didn't think it went any
And it
further than
worked
that.
out that you had, I think it was about 30% Irish, DNA.
So
I think it was
30 Irish
33%, something like that. And then the rest was from all over.
Yeah.
Bit of Scandinavian, bit of the potteries.
Yeah.
Some from the West Country, and Kent. There was a large amount from Kent.
Kent, yeah.
So
does that make a difference when you find that?
Not really, I suppose. Not really.
Oh, to me it did. It made a significant difference to me.
He's totally pushed the English that side, and he's Irish now.
because it was interesting what some of the other people in the film were saying about suppressing their Irishness, parents suppressing it. Because my mother used to have a telephone voice. I thought it was only a telephone voice, which was very clipped and quite English. And she used to use it on occasions when she went back to Ireland, and they used to laugh about it. And people remember her for it in Ireland, that this affected voice that she could put on. And when I think about growing up in the 60s and 70s here, I don't think my parents celebrated their Irish culture a lot. We used to hear the rebel songs and that. We had all the LPs. Mum used to have shamrock sent over for St. Patrick's Day, but it wasn't a big deal. I think on reflection, there was probably an amount of suppression of our Irishness at that time. And so I was brought up thinking I'm English or British. And it was only a couple of years ago that when I had my ancestry DNA done, that it struck me that I'm 100% Irish, 100% Irish, not 90, 97 or 99 like some of my Irish relatives, people living in Ireland. I'm 100% Irish.
I came over in 1963. I was born in the 6 counties in County Fermanagh. And again, back in them times where it was scarce, if you weren't the right religion, you didn't get a job. Parents didn't have a job. So you had no alternative. You had to move out, try elsewhere. Unfortunately, I came over here with 3 brothers and my parents. And thank God we moved on and done well for ourselves and didn't look back. Much of that is down to Father Casey. In fairness to him again, I say.
How old were you when you came over?
I was 10.
10.
Yeah.
Was there an Irish Catholic school here?
There was a Catholic school here. There was a St. Ethelbert's school here,
Yes.
which is still here.
Yes.
But the St. Ethelbert's back in them days was the back end of the High Street,
That's
near
right.
the Herschel Arms.
Was it a large school?
No, it was a smallish
No.
school. You know, and then we progressed from that school to St. Joseph's
Yes.
in Shandy Calf Lane,
Yes.
which is still there. And also I went in there as a 10, I was 11 when I went in there. Most of the boys and girls that were in there were of Irish ancestry anyway.
Yeah.
So you got all like houses on fire.
Yeah.
You know, I first came over here, but it's to say 10 again, but you spoke differently from everybody else at the school. You know what I mean? But you acclimatized, you done your best.
Was it predominantly Irish?
It was most of it, yeah, Irish, yeah, very much so. Yeah. Catholic school as a Slough.
Did your parents bring you back each summer back home?
They did, yeah. But then when I was 15, 16, I made my own way back, you know, and I've been fortunate enough over the years as well. I've always gone back. You know, each summer, come back for a week and enjoyed that, you know. I never lost my Irishness. I've been here 60 years. I've never lost that.
It doesn't mean that I'm playing Irish records all the time.
No,
but
you're just doing Irish walking football. Talking about
I've got my Irish passport now.
Irish passport. See, he's foreigner to me now.
So call me Plastic Paddy if you feel you must. But if I think you mean it now, you'll eat some English dust. 'Cause I can take a slaggin', laugh at an Irish yarn, but certain things are sacred, as you're about to learn. Me father came from Ireland, me mother did as well. So if you say I'm English, you can bugger off to hell. Here's the simple reason You'll all agree, of course. Just because I was born in a stable doesn't mean I'm a bloody horse. Sin